This is the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Architect Exam Podcast. I'm Emily, and today we're diving into a topic that might not sound super interesting at first, but trust me, it's absolutely critical to every successful construction project out there, and that is construction submittals. I know, and only an architect would get excited about paperwork, but stick with me. By the end of this episode, you might find yourself strangely passionate about submittals too. Whether you're studying for the ARE or preparing for the CDT exam, or maybe you just want to understand how construction projects actually come together, today's episode is for you. This topic comes up repeatedly on the ARE exam, especially the construction evaluation. That's the CE division. I work a lot with our ARE boot campers here at Young Architect, and I've seen how understanding submittals can be a major light bulb moment or aha moment while studying. It connects so many concepts about how projects actually come together in the field. In this episode, we'll break down what submittals actually are, the different types that you'll encounter, how the submittal process works, and why they matter so much. And I'll also give you some practical tips to make the process run smoothly. So let's dive in. Let's start with the basics. What exactly are construction submittals? In the simplest terms, submittals are documents and samples that contractors provide to architects and engineers for their approval before actually buying the materials and starting the work. These are essentially the contractor's way of saying, hey, I've reviewed the documents, I've reviewed the drawings and the design. Here's exactly what we plan to use and how we plan to do it. Is this what you had in mind? Please confirm. So think of submittals as a confirmation mechanism that ensures everyone is picturing the same end result before materials are actually ordered and before money is being spent and construction begins. The submittals process creates a documented trail of what is proposed, reviewed, and approved. This provides clarity and protection for everyone involved on the project, especially if questions arise later. Let me give you a simple analogy for submittals that might help. Imagine you're planning a road trip with a friend. You have a destination in mind. Think of the destination as the design of a project. So before you start driving, you show your friend the exact route that you plan to take and the estimated arrival time. Think of that plan as a submittal. Your friend checks if that matches their expectations before you hit the road, burn gas, and spend time, maybe potentially even heading in the wrong direction. So that confirmation of that path and that route is their verification, their confirmation of your submittal. Another way to think about submittals, have you ever sent a photo of a product to someone before purchasing it just to make sure you bought the right one? That's essentially a mini submittal process. You're confirming the item before you make the purchase. In construction, the stakes are just much higher. We're talking about ensuring the right materials, building systems, and methods for installation in a multi-million-dollar project. So obviously you want to do a review and approval process. Next, let's review the types of submittals that you may encounter. When it comes to submittals, there isn't just one standard format. In fact, there are several different types, each serving a unique purpose in the construction process. Let's break down the main types you'll encounter on projects. And don't worry about memorizing all of these different types. Let's just focus on understanding the basic concepts and when you might use each type. The first example is shop drawings. Shop drawings are detailed drawings showing exactly how something will be built or assembled. They usually come from manufacturers or fabricators who take the architect's design and design intent, and then they fill in the specifics of how their product or item will actually make that design happen and how it will all come together. So to give you an example, think of a custom steel staircase that needs to be built for a project. The shop drawings for that steel case would show every connection, every bolt size, and all of the dimensions provided from the steel fabricator to ensure that that staircase will fit the space and meet the structural requirements of the project. The shop drawings really get into the nitty-gritty details that aren't typically shown on the architectural drawings. And let me tell you, sometimes these shop drawings arrive looking like they were sketched out on a napkin during a happy hour. I've seen messy handwriting. I've seen, hand-drawn sketches that would even make a doctor's prescription look legible. But messy or not, these shop drawings are very important for custom fabricated items. Things like a steel structure, a cabinet, maybe railings, or even a glass curtain wall system. Anything that needs to be specifically tailored to a project needs a shop drawing. The next example for submittals is product data. So beyond shop drawings, product data are technical specifications from manufacturers about the material and product to be used in a project. Think of product data like the detailed specifications you'd look at when buying, for example, a new appliance. You may pull up all of the product information and technical information that confirms that that product will perform as needed. So think of also like HVAC equipment, mechanical equipment, for instance. Product data would include capacity rating, electrical requirements, dimensions, and warranty information. All of those written details will ensure that what gets installed will work as intended. So a contractor, or maybe even a subcontractor, would supply all of the product data for HVAC equipment, and then that would be confirmed and approved. Next example of submittals are samples. So while drawings and specifications tell part of the story, nothing compares like seeing the real thing in person, which is why we also have physical samples. These are examples of materials. They could be flooring or maybe even a color swatch, like a paint color, or maybe even a physical brick, one unit of brick that is, brought in as a physical sample for everyone to see and approve of. This will let everyone see, touch, and feel all of the items that will be physically put onto a project. And it's nice to be able to see these items live and direct in person rather than just on a screen or written on a piece of paper. It's very crucial for finishes, especially like paint and tile or carpet, where colors and textures can really give you a different feel in person than they would in a catalog. I once had a client who approved a floor tile just based on an image that they saw on a website. But when they actually saw the physical tile sample in person, they didn't like the texture of the tile and it wasn't what they were expecting. So having that physical sample handy really helped us and saved us from a lot of headache of ordering the tile, receiving pallets of the tile later, only for the owner to not like the tile at all. Next example of submittals we have are mock-ups. So these are usually used for more complex projects. Mock-ups are a small sample of a larger material or larger building component that's going to be installed. So you're really just taking a small scaled down version of a unit that's going to be used for a building. And later, there's going to be a much larger full scale version of that installed on a building or project. But as a mock-up, you're just looking at a small scaled down version of it. So for example, think of a building facade. You may do a mock-up of a building facade or a section of a building envelope that will show all the components of an exterior wall. So it may show window connection, flashing, and sealants used to test weatherproofing. So you're looking at this mock-up of a section of the exterior facade, and you're checking the appearance and all the connections before the entire facade is built. Mockups are especially helpful for complex assemblies where the interaction between different materials is critical, and those connections are very important to get right before you move forward with the entire scaled up installation. So those are some primary types of submittal examples. Let's go over a few others. Some other examples are test reports, which are documentation proving that materials meet required standards. So think of test reports like concrete strength tests or maybe fire rating tests. Those are another form of submittals. Also, engineers' calculations, providing that data and showing that math behind structural elements or systems, proving that they'll perform as needed for a specific project. That's another great example of submittals. Also, warranties and manuals on a project or a product. Those provide information and they provide also language around guarantees and maintenance requirements for a project and maintenance requirements for a product, which are very important for the maintenance and lifespan of a building. So those are also a good example of submittals, and those should be reviewed and approved as well. Each type of these submittals serve a specific purpose in the quality control process of a project. Together, they form a comprehensive approval system that ensures the finished building will match what was designed and specified. When we're developing our ARE 101 courses, we created numerous practice questions covering these different submittal types, especially for the construction evaluation exam. So, understanding these distinctions is crucial not just for passing your exams, but for real world practice as well.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, your guide to passing the ARE.
Hey, I know you're probably at the gym hitting those weights or on the treadmill while listening to this Submittals podcast. But here's the deal. You don't need to memorize everything right now. After recording this episode, Emily and I compiled a complete set of notes on submittals into a straightforward 2-page PDF. Just visit youngarchitect.com/submittal to download your free submittal study guide to add to your ARE prep study materials. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
So we've gone over the main types of submittals that you're going to encounter throughout a project, but how does this process actually work? Who does what? Let's walk through a typical workflow to understand how submittals move from preparation to approval. So how the submittal process actually works, let's go over that in practice. The process isn't just about creating and reviewing paperwork. It's actually a structured workflow involving multiple participants, each with specific responsibilities. So let's take a look at who's involved and what happens at each stage and how a submittal moves from preparation to that final approval. First is the planning phase. This process begins at the kickoff of a project. The contractor creates what's called a submittal log, or a schedule based on the specifications to identify what needs to be submitted and when. This is a crucial planning step that many teams rush through in the beginning, or maybe they don't see the importance in it, but taking the time to create a comprehensive log up front saves countless headaches later. So, for example, for a 12-month project, you might spend the first month just getting key submittals approved, but that investment will pay off throughout the length of that one-year project. So that first step was the planning phase. Next is preparation. Once there's a plan in place, subcontractors are going to gather information from various suppliers and manufacturers and start preparing the required documents and samples for their scope of work. So for example, the general contractor may engage with an electrical subcontractor and let them know what submittals are required from them. Then the electrical subcontractor is going to go out and collect product data sheets and for their light fixtures that they're curating for the project and submit that to the general contractor. Or maybe the flooring subcontractor will actually start to source samples of tile that they plan to install for the project and bring that to the general contractor. Or even if it's not physical samples, maybe the steel subcontractor and steel fabricator will start to create their detailed shop drawings for the project. So after preparation, we have the contractor's review. So before the general contractor is sending these submittals and these documents over to the design team, the general contractor needs to review what their subcontractors have shared with them. This step is crucial and it is often skipped, which can lead to some confusion once the design team does review those submittals. So the general contractor should check that the submittals that were given to them from their subcontractors is complete and actually meets the project requirements. They need to look for coordination across the trades as well to make sure there's no conflict between different trades. Think of this as like the first filter to catch obvious errors before the architect sees them. Although sometimes I think contractors treat submittals like a game of hot potato. They may say, here you go, it's off my desk now, it's in your hands. They might want to be getting it off their desk and into someone else's inbox quickly, but the best contractors really take this review period very seriously, and it shows the quality of their submittals when it's all reviewed and coordinated. Okay, so after the general contractor reviews their subcontractor's initial submittals, then the contractor will submit this to the design team. The design team will review these submittals to ensure that they meet the design intent and specifications. So while the architect has the professional duty to review submittals, it is not their job to catch every possible error or to redesign any of the work to make the submittals work. So this is very important to understand for the ARE exam, the CDT exam, and just in practice. Architects are checking for conformance in submittals, that it matches the design intent, but they are not taking responsibility for dimensions, quantities, or the correctness of this submittal. That is the general contractor's responsibility. Remember that, it's important. So the next step in the submittal phase is the response. So following the architect's or the engineer's review, the design team is tasked with responding to each submittal, and there's various options in the response of that submittal. So, they could be approved right off the bat, or they can be given one of the following notes. The first one is no exception taken. So the design team may respond that there's no exception taken on this submittal, that the submittal meets all the requirements, and that work can proceed. And it could also be approved with the note approved as noted, or maybe it'll say approved or approved, but make corrections as noted. So this is minor issues with the submittal that need to be addressed, but work can begin as long as those notes are followed. There's also the possibility that the submittal can have a request or a note on it from the design team that says revise and resubmit. So this is when there's significant issues that require correction and another review process before work can continue. And then finally, there is just a flat out rejection where the design team can reject the submittal because it does not meet requirements and it must be completely redone. Have you ever seen an architect stamp these days on a submittal, for instance? They've evolved a lot from just simply having that approval stamp, one word. There's a lot of legality involved with approving shop drawings or a submittal, and there's a lot of legal disclaimers that can barely fit on an architect's stamp of approval that really should be reviewed. So think of it's kind of like commercials for medicine or prescriptions with fine print, really. You could stamp something as approved, but it doesn't say this approval does not relieve the contractor of responsibility, nor does it imply we've checked everything. And by the way, we aren't responsible if it rains on Tuesday while you install this product. I'm surprised that they don't have all of this language included on their stamp because it's necessary. There's a lot of legal implications with approving something. So that's why we have one of those four notes that I mentioned before, no exceptions taken, as approved as noted. Those really, it shows that the architects reviewed them, but they're not taking any of the legality on. They're not taking any of the liability on because it is ultimately the general contractor's, means and methods and control to implementing those subcontractors' work onto the project. And speaking of implementation, that is the next phase in the submittal process. So once approved, contractors can purchase materials and begin installation of the work that they detailed in their approved submittals. The approved documents become the standard against which the work is actually measured. So once that is actually installed, it will be compared against the approved submittal. Remember, the submittal process is a conversation, not just a rubber stamp. Each party plays a specific role in ensuring quality and compliance. It's worth noting that on today's projects, many teams use digital submittal systems and digital stamping methods to track each step automatically and review and show all parties involved on a project that it has been reviewed. Oftentimes people are sent notification when something has been reviewed and stamped. This digital process really helps keep a clear record of what has been done and who can start their work. So fortunately now there's an expedited process in the submittal review process, especially when it's online and digital. So we've covered what submittals are and the different types and how that process works from start to finish. You might still be wondering, why do we go through all this effort? Let me share some real world examples that show why submittals are absolutely critical to a project's success. So this is why submittals matter so much. I once worked on an office renovation project where the specifications were a little vague. They simply called for gray paint in the interior at the main lobby. So without a proper submittal process, the painting contractor chose what they thought was a light gray, and it actually had some blue undertones in it. And they went ahead and installed and painted the lobby. But when the owners saw the completed space, they really hated the tone of gray that was chosen. It clashed with the company signage and branding. So we actually needed to repaint the entire lobby. And this was a 3-story lobby, and repainting it was not an easy task. It actually delayed the project to close out by 2 weeks, and it cost an additional, I think it was like $20,000 to $30,000. So really a simple paint sample and a paint submittal review process would have prevented this entire issue. It prevents from people just, or installers just making their best guess to go ahead and install an item and keep the project moving. The submittal process is really checks and balances throughout the construction process to make sure it is ultimately what the owner wants for the final completed project. So think of submittals as a building's vaccination record. They prevent serious problems before they develop. They're preventative. And if you skip them, you're taking a risk, and it could be an unnecessary risk with very severe and expensive consequences. So I'm sure you can think of some examples in your day-to-day or in your experience working in construction and buildings where a simple review process as a preventative measure could have saved the project a lot of time and money.
You're listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, the official podcast of the Young Architect Academy.
Next, let's talk about a process to make them better for our projects. So I've gathered some practical tips that will help you regardless of which side of the submittal process you're on, whether you're the design team or you're working in construction, or maybe you're the owner of a project. Let's go over these tips. And these are all based on my experience. I've had them in successful projects. I've also learned them through projects that maybe were less successful or challenging. I think these are very practical and good to keep in mind just from this point moving forward. So first, start early, prioritize your plan, and be very strategic about it. So create that comprehensive submittal schedule first. This is at project kickoff, identifying all required submittals and when they should be submitted. So a date associated with every submittal. Next, you'll prioritize submittals that have a very long lead time, or that if they arrive not on time, it would delay construction activities. So usually like windows and doors have a long lead time, building system components like HVAC, or maybe, elevator or conveying equipment have a long lead time. I always recommend front loading the process and aiming to have at least 80% of the submittals approved before construction even begins. That way you can start ordering these materials, curating them to be on the site and ready for installation so the project can keep moving. And make sure, again, that you prioritize the larger submittals so that it doesn't affect multiple trades. If you need to prioritize, again, windows and doors or maybe conveying systems, because other trades that are connected to those components need to have their items in place as well, and they shouldn't be delayed if the other items are not installed first. Next tip is to be thorough and accurate, because quality is more important than quantity when it comes to submittals. As a contractor, contractors should implement internal reviews before sending these submittals to the design team. This is to catch any mistakes or errors or oversights that might have been made by the subcontractors. And this really saves time on that review process or during that review process from the design team. And also include all required information the first time, because incomplete submittals will just ultimately waste everyone's time. Remember that quality matters over quantity. 10 well-prepared submittals will move through the review process much faster than 50 hasty ones. My next tip is to use technology tools effectively. In today's digital world, you should leverage the tools available to you, adopt digital submittal management systems that track status or send automatic reminders and maintain version control. You want to make sure you're dating the most recent submittal, or if there is a revision of a submittal, you want to make sure you've got the most recent one at hand and the one that you're approving is the correct one. There are digital tools and online project management software that can help you keep track of all of this and manage it well across multiple teams. There are cloud-based platforms that all trades of a project can be connected to. So it's not just all living in the design team's file structure. Everyone can see the action and the activities that are happening on these files across all team members of a project. That's really important to have. I think because you can have hundreds of submittals on a project, you really should use a cloud-based software that helps everyone kind of see what's happening and see what the most current submittal is and when it is actually approved. Next is to implement standardized templates for submittals to ensure consistency and completeness. So instead of getting a different form from every subcontractor in their own way of describing how the work is to be installed or the product that's to be ordered, have them have a standardized form that they can fill out and submit. That will really expedite the review process and make it more correct, because if you're filling out a template, you're more likely to include more information and all the information required instead of accidentally forgetting and leaving something out. My next tip is to have good communication strategies. Clear communication is essential for an effective submittal process. It establishes clear expectation for review timelines with all parties involved, and this should be set at the beginning of a project. During project meetings or scheduled meetings with the entire team, make submittals a standing agenda item and schedule it in project meetings in order to keep track and address any issues that come up. Don't just wait until a submittal is submitted in order to talk about it. If it needs to be a weekly or bi-weekly conversation, so be it. And when submittals are rejected, don't just resubmit them blindly. Have a conversation to fully understand the concerns. Pick up the phone, ask the design team what's needed, or maybe call the contractor and ask, talk about the submittal that's being submitted. Don't just kind of play this tennis match with paperwork. Be sure to clearly communicate to the whole team what the expectations are and what to do moving forward from a rejected submittal. So think of the submittal process like a relay race. Think of it like a baton handoff. Think of that as the way of communicating. And delaying that handoff is where a team could really lose a lot of time. So making sure that everyone's kind of on board and submitting and reviewing things in a timely process can help you gain time in a project. My next tip is to track and follow up systematically. So in order to stay organized and proactive on a project, maintain a comprehensive log showing the status of each submittal, when it was due, when it was actually submitted, and the date that it was reviewed and returned. Include all of those dates to all responsible parties on a submittal, and then set up regular check-ins on any submittals that may be needed to be revised and returned, or maybe are a little late. This will help to prevent from a submittal getting kind of lost in the shuffle and fall between the cracks and then cause a delay later on in the project. So analyze what's needed, analyze the trends of submittals. If there's a tendency to be rejecting submittals, maybe there needs to be a meeting or a conversation had about expectations to prevent that from happening again. And document any lessons learned on a project of the submittal process for future projects, whether you're on the contractor side of things or the design team side of things. Use every review and submittal process as a learning lesson for future projects to be more efficient in the future. On some projects, the submittal log ends up being longer than the specifications themselves. I've seen logs with hundreds of submittal entries, and it's like trying to manage a small city's worth of paperwork. But it's really good to keep track of these things, have that log, keep informing it, and there is chaos to that long list, and it's important to keep track of everything. And even with all of these practical tips and best practices in place, teams can often fall into some common traps and get a little disorganized about these things. So next, let's go over some pitfalls that you should watch and look out for to keep your submittal process running smoothly. One of the most common mistakes is sending partial submittals that don't contain all of the required information. For example, if a product data sheet is shared for a lighting fixture, but it actually omits the required photometric data or mounting details specific to that project, it's pretty incomplete. It's just kind of a vague submission. This will guarantee a note from the design team to revise and resubmit, which is just going to add days and time to that review process. Or you may receive or share a submittal that ignores the submittal schedule, which is a critical mistake. I see it a lot if you just completely miss a deadline on a submittal or you submit something out of turn. This can just lead to a snowball effect of delaying a project. For example, a late submittal on structural steel can delay the entire building envelope coming together because you need the structural steel in order to build your building. Think of submittals like a domino effect. If one falls late, everything gets late behind it as well. Another mistake is failing to highlight deviations. I've seen contractors make this mistake, trying to slip in substitutions past the design team in a submittal without explicitly highlighting them and pointing out that it is a deviation. And this is just a recipe for conflict. The general conditions of the contract specifically require contractors to notify the architect when a submittal doesn't necessarily fully comply with the requirements of that submittal. A better approach to this would be to clearly highlight, circle, redline that deviation, and then provide justification as to why that might still work and meet design intent. That transparency from a general contractor to the design team shows that they're not trying to sneak anything by them in a design submittal. And that transparency just builds trust between both parties. So I strongly encourage that happening in that submittal process. Don't forget to highlight that because it may be misunderstood as something sneaky. Another pitfall is just poor organization or poor tracking of submittals, which many teams struggle with when there's a lot of submittals, losing track of them and their status and their due dates, or even using an outdated submittal and referring to an outdated or maybe unapproved submittal can lead to confusion and mistakes. I know of a contractor who installed ceiling tiles based on a rejected submittal simply because they couldn't find that final approved one and they needed to keep the project going. So the solution to this is just early on to implement a reliable tracking system, whether it's digital or even manual, if that needs to be the case. As long as everyone has access to that document and that log, there will be more organization of the submittal process. Another pitfall is just ineffective communication about rejections of submittals and that process, because if and when a submittal is rejected, failing to understand the full reason why before resubmitting can just lead to another rejection of that submittal. So when reviewing a submittal or when receiving a rejected submittal, clarify exactly what needs to change, especially if it's a complex or technical detail component. Pick up the phone and have that conversation with the design team or with the contractor as to what exactly needs to happen. Of course, we can mark up a submittal and put all of our legal language on it, but really pick up that phone and have that clear, transparent conversation to resolve any issues. Another pitfall is treating the submittals as a checkbox activity. This is a very damaging mindset, and that's when we view submittals as just mere paperwork rather than a critical quality control process. The contractor's internal review should be thorough, not cursory. You're really putting your reputation on the line with each submittal. So remember that submittals are risk management tools. They're not just administrative busy work. They're not there to hurt you or make you look bad or question you. It's really a checks and balances before the design work and the design intent in the drawings gets physically put onto a site. So it's really that last filter to make sure that building component or product is the right one for that project. So we've covered a lot of ground today. Let's wrap up with some final thoughts and just key takeaways about submittals. Submittals truly bridge that gap between design and construction. These submittals, they exist to ensure that everyone is on the same page before work physically begins. And they come in various shapes and forms. We went over shop drawings, product data, physical samples, and a little bit more some test control documents. Each of these are examples of submittals, and they serve a specific purpose in the quality control of a project. Effective submittal management, it will save you time, it will save you money, and it also be safer on a project and a job site to have these in place. And if you do nothing else, just really starting with a comprehensive submittal log at the beginning of a project at the kickoff, this will transform your process throughout a project success. This will set you up for success. So I highly recommend starting with that submittal log first. So think of submittals as the foundation of your quality control program for a project. And like any foundation, if it is weak, everything built on top of it is at risk and will suffer. So make sure you have a strong foundation in your project by starting strong with submittals. I hope this overview helps you in your exam preparation and in your professional practice. And if you're preparing for the Construction Document Technologist certification, that's the CDT exam, our comprehensive CDT 101 course covers everything you need to know about construction documentation, including an entire module dedicated just to this, submittals. So visit youngarchitect.com/CDT101 to learn more about that. And for those of you who are studying for your ARE exams, especially the construction evaluation, that's the CE division, this submittal knowledge is essential. So check out our ARE 101 courses at youngarchitect.com/ARE 101. And thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast, and good luck on your exams.
Thanks for listening to the Architect Exam Podcast. Ready to take your studying to the next level? Visit our online ARE Architecture School website at academy.youngarchitect.com to learn more about how we can help you. See you next time.